Welcome to RPG PhD, where we explore tabletop role-playing games with depth and insight, without losing sight of the fun that makes them magical. I'm Dr. Ben, and today we're diving into one of the most foundational models in game design, the MDA framework. That's mechanics, dynamics, and aesthetics. Whether you're homebrewing your own system, tuning a campaign, or just wondering why some games feel totally different from others, understanding MDA can unlock a whole new level of insight. So let's break down how this framework works and how it shows up in everything from D&D to Blades in the Dark. Tabletop role-playing games are complex experiences that blend rules, player choices, and storytelling into memorable adventures. Understanding what makes an RPG tick can feel like peering under the hood of a mysterious machine. This is where the Mechanics, Dynamics, Aesthetics MDA framework comes in. Originally developed by game designers Hunicke, Marc, LeBlanc, and Robert Zubek in the early 2000s, the MDA framework provides a formal lens for analyzing how games work and why they feel fun. This framework was created to bridge the gap between game design and player experience, helping designers, game masters, and players alike to understand how a game's structure leads to its fun. MDA, as I mentioned before, stands for Mechanics, Dynamics, Aesthetics, the three layers of game design and experience. In simple terms, these mean mechanics, the raw components and rules of the game. Mechanics are the data, algorithms, and game systems. In a video game, this might be things like the physics engine or scoring rules. In a tabletop RPG, mechanics include things like dice rolls, character statistics, turn order, and combat rules. It's what the game allows you to do and how it works under the hood. Dynamics is the runtime behavior that arises when players interact with the mechanics. Dynamics describe the emergent gameplay, the strategies, behaviors, and outcomes that happen over time as the rules are put into action. In a role-playing game context, dynamics include things like the pacing of a session, the tension of resource management, the cooperation or friendly competition between players, and the flow of the story as influenced by the rules. Dynamics are essentially what happens at the table when the mechanics are in motion. Aesthetics, the emotional experience of the game, or the fun, if you will. Aesthetics in MDA refers to the desirable emotional responses evoked in players when they engage with the game system. Rather than visuals or art style, which aesthetic sometimes means in casual use, here we mean the feelings, moods, and player satisfaction that come from play. In a role-playing game, this could be the excitement of triumphing over a tough challenge, the suspense of a horror scene, the camaraderie of a team adventure, or the imaginative pleasure of inhabiting a fictional world. It answers the question, how does this make us feel and why do we enjoy it? One of the key insights of MDA is that these three layers are linked in a chain. The idea is that mechanics produce dynamics, which in turn produce aesthetics. The game's rules, mechanics, lead to certain patterns of play, dynamics, which lead to the emotional payoff, aesthetics. Another way to put it is that designers and game masters create the game starting with mechanics and hope it results in fun aesthetics. This is choice of game, while players experience the game in the reverse. We'll talk more about this difference in perspective later, but first let's break down each of the MDA components in the tabletop role-playing game context one by one. Mechanics are the concrete rules and procedures that make up a game. In a tabletop RPG, mechanics are found in the rulebooks, everything from how to create a character to how combat works to how conflict is resolved. If you imagine the role-playing game as a machine, the mechanics are the gears and levers inside it. They include attributes and stats, dice rolls and probabilities, resource tracking like hit points or magic points, movement rules on a grid, abilities of powers, etc. Mechanics are what the game is on a technical level, the code of the game, so to speak. Each role-playing game system has its own distinctive mechanics. Mechanics can be crunchy and number-heavy, or rules-light and narrative. Genre-tailored, like horror games have sanity points, for instance, or completely generic. What they all have in common is that they set the possibilities and constraints for what can happen in the game. If you change the mechanics, you change the game's behavior. In fact, many game masters who homebrew their own rules or tweak systems are effectively adjusting the mechanics to fine-tune the play experience. Once players and GMs start using the mechanics during a session, we get dynamics, the real-time emergent gameplay that unfolds. Dynamics are about behavior and interaction over time. They answer questions like, what do players actually do during the game? How does the game session flow from moment to moment? What patterns form as the rules are repeatedly applied? If mechanics are the rules written in the book, dynamics are the game as it is actually played. Several factors make up the dynamics of a tabletop RPG session. How challenges are presented and overcome, how players make decisions, how the story progresses, how fast or slow the pace is, how cooperative the players are, and so on. Dynamics often aren't explicitly written in the rules. They emerge from how the mechanics are used by the group. If mechanics are the ingredients, dynamics are the resulting dish when you mix those ingredients and cook them in play. Dynamics are a bit trickier to pin down than mechanics because they're emergent. Even a simple mechanic can lead to complex dynamics. Consider a basic rule like drawing a random encounter card whenever the party takes too long. That single mechanic might create a dynamic where players feel time pressure and move cautiously. They start whispering at the table, we need to hurry before something bad finds us, which in turn creates an atmosphere of tension. The MDA framework encourages us as designers or game masters to think about these runtime behaviors. For example, are the players engaged and cooperating? Are they bored during certain parts? Do they take extreme risks or play very cautiously? These are questions of dynamics, and they directly connect to whether the game is delivering the experience we want. In the MDA framework, aesthetics refers to the intended emotional responses and overall experience that a game evokes in its players. In other words, aesthetics are the reason players find the game fun or engaging. This could be excitement, tension, wonder, camaraderie, fear, triumph, creativity, or any number of feelings. A helpful way to think about it is to identify what kind of fun a game is offering. The original creators of MDA described 8 kinds of fun that games might target. Sensation. Game as sense pleasure. This is the visceral enjoyment from sensory stimuli. In video games, it might be stunning visuals or music. In tabletop RPGs, it could be the delight of rolling a handful of dice and hearing them clatter, the tactile feel of beautiful dice or cards, or the ambience of a well-decorated game table. Even the artwork in an RPG book or the evocative descriptions a GM provides contribute to sensation. In role-playing games, sensation is a more subtle aesthetic, but think of the pleasure of a spooky soundtrack during a horror game, or the cozy atmosphere of snacks and friends around a table, the sensory experience surrounding the game. Fantasy, game as make-believe. This is the aesthetic of immersion in an imaginary world or role. It's the pleasure of pretending to be someone else and experiencing a world of fiction. All role-playing games deliver on fantasy to some extent, since you are literally taking on a character role. But some games emphasize it more. A high fantasy game like Dungeons & Dragons obviously offers the thrill of living in a magical world, slaying dragons and casting spells. A sci-fi role-playing game or a superhero RPG gives the fantasy of being in those genres. Even in a realistic setting, it's about what would it be like to be this character. The fantasy aesthetic is strong when the game makes it easy for players to suspend disbelief and really feel part of the fictional world. Narrative, game as drama. This is the enjoyment of a compelling story that unfolds. Role-playing games are essentially story-generating games, so narrative is a huge aesthetic focus for many groups. This can be the excitement of an epic plot twist in your campaign, the investment in a character's personal story arc, or the collective creation of a narrative that could rival a favorite novel or TV series. Different systems support narrative to different degrees. For example, Powered by the Apocalypse games and Fate put a big emphasis on narrative outcomes. Their mechanics are built to facilitate story twists and character development. Whereas in some dungeon crawl style games, narrative might emerge more incidentally through the sequence of events. A narrative-driven RPG experience is one where players walk away talking about that awesome story we created together. Challenge, game as obstacle course. This is the fun of facing difficult tasks and overcoming them. It's the aesthetic of mastery, strategy, and triumph against odds. In role-playing game terms, challenge comes through things like tough combat encounters, clever puzzles, or tricky social dilemmas that players must navigate. D&D strongly delivers a challenge aesthetic. Think of the satisfaction of defeating a powerful boss monster through teamwork and smart tactics, or solving a riddle to get past a magical door. Some RPG players live for that sense of accomplishment. They enjoy optimizing their characters and devising plans to beat the challenges the game master throws at them. Other games also use challenge. In Blades in the Dark, each heist is a challenge to be overcome with wits and skill. In Call of Cthulhu, simply surviving with your sanity intact is a significant challenge. A game with a strong challenge aesthetic keeps players on their toes and makes victory feel earned. Fellowship, game as social framework. This is the enjoyment of social interaction and cooperation. Role-playing games are inherently social, cooperative games, most of them anyway. So fellowship is often a core part of the fun. This aesthetic is about hanging out with friends, laughing, in-jokes at the table, and the team spirit of we're in this adventure together. Some games emphasize fellowship through mechanics that encourage teamwork. For instance, Blades in the Dark has explicit group actions and a crew sheet that binds the players as a team of scoundrels, fostering a sense of togetherness. Many story-focused indie games have a strong fellowship aspect because they require trust and collaboration in storytelling. Even in a more competitive role-playing game scenario, like an adversarial GM style or a PvP game, the players around the table still often enjoy the fellowship of role-playing together. A campaign that people continue for years is usually held together by fellowship, the weekly ritual of friends gathering to play. Discovery, game as uncharted territory. This is the thrill of exploration and finding something new. In a role-playing game, discovery can mean literal exploration of a map or game world, uncovering what's in the next room, or what lies beyond the mountain range, as well as discovery of lore and secrets in the story. It's also the joy of discovering what will happen in the narrative. Since role-playing games are not scripted, even the game master often doesn't know how things will turn out. Systems that support exploration, like hex crawl rules or random encounter tables, feed the discovery aesthetic. Dungeons & Dragons and other fantasy games often deliver discovery through world building and dungeon design. Players feel like intrepid adventurers in a vast world. A game like Traveller, a sci-fi RPG, might emphasize discovery of star systems and cultures. Even beyond setting, discovery happens when the game encourages players to try crazy ideas just to see what occurs. The pleasure of, can we do this? What will be the outcome? And then finding out through play. Expression, game as self-discovery. This aesthetic is about creative expression and individual style. Role-playing games are a fantastic outlet for this kind of fun. Players create unique characters that often reflect aspects of their personality or fantasies, and through play they make choices that express their values or creativity. For example, in a game like Fate, a player might craft an aspect like reformed thief seeking redemption. This not only shapes the story, but also expresses the kind of character arc that player finds appealing. In a more mechanics-heavy game, expression might come through how you build your character, choosing a funky combination of powers or a distinctive fighting style to reflect a concept. Games with open-ended character customization, or those that encourage players to narrate their actions with style, feed the expression aesthetic. Even game masters experience this aesthetic. A game master who homebrews an entire world or writes elaborate backstories is expressing their own creativity. When a game makes you feel like this story has a piece of me in it, it's hitting the expression note. Submission, game as pastime. This refers to the enjoyment of the game as an ongoing hobby or ritual, something you just do for fun and relaxation. It's the aesthetic of being submitted to the game in the sense of coming back to it habitually and accepting its rules and loop as a pleasant way to spend time. In video games, this might be like playing Tetris or Solitaire to unwind. In role-playing games, submission might appear in the comfort of a regular weekly game where not every session is epic, sometimes we're just enjoying the routine of play. It can also relate to immersion, losing oneself in the activity for its own sake. Think of a long-running campaign where even a session where nothing major happens is still enjoyable because you just like living in that game world for a while. Submission as an RPG aesthetic might also manifest as the lifestyle aspect of the hobby. Collecting dice, going to conventions, reading role-playing game books for fun, basically embracing the game as a pastime you love. Different games and groups prioritize different aesthetics. For instance, D&D often emphasizes challenge, fantasy, and fellowship. It promises epic fantasy adventure, fantasy, with tactical combat and leveling up, challenge, and it's usually a group of friends on a quest together, fellowship. It can certainly provide narrative and discovery too. A good dungeon crawl is all about discovery. A story-heavy game like Apocalypse World might put more weight on narrative, expression, and discovery, letting challenge be a bit softer. Failure is narratively interesting, not just a loss. A comedic light game like Fiasco offers a lot of expression and narrative. Players create outrageous situations and dramatic irony, and fellowship, usually a lot of laughter together, but little challenge in the traditional sense. There's no winning. Mostly you're there for the story train wreck. It's important to note that these aesthetics are not mutually exclusive. Any given game or campaign can have multiple kinds of fun intertwined. Also, what the designer intends as the aesthetic might differ from what a particular group experiences, depending on how they play. For example, you could take a horror game intended to evoke fear, the aesthetic of sensation in terms of dread and narrative perhaps, but if a group plays it very tongue-in-cheek, they might instead get fellowship and humor. Not officially one of the 8, but certainly in emotion. The MDA framework list of aesthetic isn't exhaustive, but it gives us a vocabulary to discuss the target experiences of a game beyond just saying it should be fun. As game masters or designers, we can ask, what kind of fun are we aiming for? Now, while the MDA framework has been widely influential, it's not without its criticisms, especially when applied to tabletop role-playing games. One common critique is that it oversimplifies the complex, messy nature of play, particularly in highly social and improvisational games like tabletop RPGs. Unlike digital games where systems can be tightly controlled, tabletop RPGs are co-created in real time by players and game masters, making it difficult to cleanly separate mechanics, dynamics, and aesthetics. Additionally, some designers argue that MDA is too linear, assuming a one-way causal flow from mechanics to player emotion, when in reality player expectations, cultural context, and table dynamics can influence which rules get emphasized or ignored, reversing or complicating that flow. Others point out that the framework was, of course, originally designed for video game analysis and doesn't fully capture narrative or role-play-driven experiences where emotional aesthetics might arise more from collaborative storytelling than mechanical interaction. Despite these limitations, MDA remains a useful tool, but one best used flexibly and in tandem with other frameworks. Now that we understand mechanics, dynamics, and aesthetics, let's consider how game masters or game designers and players might think about them differently. One of the neat ideas of MDA is that the designer and the player approach the game from opposite ends. A game designer, or by extension a game master designing a campaign or adventure, works in MDA order. They start by creating or choosing mechanics with the goal of generating certain dynamics in play, which in turn will lead to the desired aesthetic experience for players. For example, as a game master, you might think, I want this campaign to feel suspenseful and scary, aesthetic. To get that, I need a dynamic where the players feel unsafe and pressed for time, dynamics. So I'll use mechanics like random horror encounters, a ticking clock for missions, and a sanity meter mechanics to produce that dynamic. In essence, the game master or designer is saying, I'll include these rules, procedures, which should make the game play out in a way that creates the mood that I want. This is akin to a chef selecting ingredients, mechanics, to achieve a certain flavor, aesthetics, in the final dish. A player, on the other hand, experiences the game in ADM order. When a player sits down at the table, the first thing they encounter is the aesthetic, the overall vibe and promise of fun. For instance, a player might hear the game master's pitch for a game. This is a gritty noir detective game in a dystopian city, and immediately get a sense of, okay, this game will have a tense, mystery-solving, atmospheric feel. That's the aesthetic expectation. As play begins, the player then engages in dynamics, how the session actually flows. Maybe they notice that the gameplay involves a lot of clue gathering, sneaking around, and paranoid planning. These are dynamic behaviors. Finally, they see the mechanics in action supporting those dynamics. Perhaps the game uses a luck point system that runs out when they take bold actions, which is a mechanic creating tension. Players usually think in terms of experience first. What was fun or not fun tonight, and only sometimes analyze why, which would lead back to which dynamics or mechanics caused that. In fact, many players might not ever think explicitly about the mechanics beyond that rule was cool or I don't like how critical hits work, but they absolutely notice the experience the game gave them. In tabletop RPGs, there's an interesting twist. The game master is both a consumer and a creator. The game's designers, those who wrote the RPG system, provided the mechanics, but the game master uses those mechanics and adds content to create a custom experience. In a sense, the game master is like a secondary game designer at the table. Role-playing game designers are not putting mechanics directly in front of players. They have to teach dungeon masters how to do it. The game master interprets and implements the written mechanic, sets up scenarios, and may even house rule or tweak things, essentially designing the gameplay dynamics that the players will experience. This means the game master has to think about MDA on two levels. Will the game system I choose yield the dynamics and aesthetic I want, and am I, as the facilitator, using it in a way to achieve those? Good game masters intuitively do this. If the group wants a high drama narrative experience, but the mechanics are too stiff, a game master might de-emphasize certain rules or introduce narrative-focused house rules, adjusting the mechanics to better serve the aesthetics. Likewise, if players are having a blast with a particular dynamic, say they love the social intrigue aspect of a game, the game master might lean into that, even if it means deviating from prepared material. Basically, nurturing the dynamics that produce the desired aesthetic, the fun for that group. The player perspective is equally important. Players may not dissect design theory, but they know what they enjoy. They might say, I love this game because the combat is so intense and satisfying, which points to a challenge aesthetic coming from combat dynamics and mechanics. Or, I enjoy how we all collaboratively tell the story, highlighting a narrative and fellowship aesthetic, supported by dynamics of sharing the narrative authority, like in Fate or Powered by the Apocalypse games. By having a vocabulary for these things, players and game masters can communicate better. During a session 0 or a debrief, they can discuss what aesthetics they want. We're aiming for more of a lighthearted fellowship and comedy vibe in this game, not so much heavy challenge. Knowing the MDA framework, a game master can translate that into dynamic mechanic decisions, maybe use a rules-light system, or explicitly include a mechanic for goofy random events to spark laughs. Designers and GMs and players are looking at the same game from opposite ends. The designer or game master asks, if I add this rule, what happens and will it feel right? Forward along this MDA. While the player asks, I felt this way during the game. Is it because of how we played or the rules we have? Tracing backward along the MDA, even if unconsciously. Both perspectives together give a complete picture of why a game works or where it might be failing. If something in a game isn't fun, a designer or game master can work backward, identify the aesthetic issue. Players are bored during combat. Examine the dynamics. They spend a lot of time doing nothing on others' turns and fights drag. And then tweak mechanics. Maybe we need faster combat rules or something for idle players to do to fix that. This holistic thinking is exactly what MDA encourages. Let's bring all these concepts together and look at how the MDA framework can be observed in a few well-known RPG systems. We've touched on these in passing, but now we'll do a more focused case study for each to see how mechanics, dynamics, and aesthetics connect in practice. First, in Dungeons & Dragons. D&D's mechanics are robust and combat-focused. Core mechanics include d20 rolls for attacks and skill checks, hit points, armor class, damage rolls, class abilities, spells, feats, etc., and an extensive list of spells and monsters, each with their own stats. There are also subsystems for things like magic item crafting, resting, short rest, long rest rules, and leveling up with experience points. These mechanics are quite detailed. For example, a 5th level wizard has a precise list of spells they can prepare, each spell with specific effects and ranges. The game has rules for various conditions, stun, poison, etc., and uses tactical maps with movement in squares or feet. In short, D&D provides a toolkit of numbers and rules to simulate combat and adventuring challenges. From those mechanics emerged the dynamic gameplay loop typical of D&D. A common dynamic pattern is exploration, encounter, combat, reward, rest, repeat. During exploration, players are cautious. If an older system of D&D, they're checking for traps because the mechanics make those traps deadly if not found. And they're managing resources like spell slots. When an encounter occurs, say meeting monsters, players snap into tactical mode. Each turn in combat, players make decisions like where to move and which action to take, often strategizing together. If I grapple the ogre, will you hit it with your sneak attack? Because the mechanics support a lot of options, grappling, shoving, spells, special abilities, the dynamic is a mini tactical puzzle every fight. There's also a dynamic of team synergy. The cleric kills the fighter at a key moment. The rogue sets up a sneak attack when the fighter distracts the enemy, which makes players feel like a coordinated unit. Outside combat, dynamics might include resource tension. We only have one healing potion left. Do we risk another fight or retreat? And curiosity driving exploration. What treasure or secret lies beyond the next door? D&D also has a social dynamic. Often one player becomes the party leader in discussions. The group divides roles, the face, the mapper, the rules expert, etc. Importantly, D&D's reward mechanics, XP and treasure, create a dynamic of constant improvement. Players feel their characters growing stronger, and that encourages them to take on bigger challenges, fueling an ongoing cycle of escalation in the campaign's scope. D&D is famous for delivering the aesthetic of epic heroic fantasy. The emotional payoff for players is a mix of challenge and fantasy primarily. Challenge comes from the tough fights and obstacles. When your group finally slays the dragon after a tense battle, with clutch dice rolls, it's exhilaration and relief, challenge fun. The fantasy element is huge. You feel like mighty heroes in a mythical world, wielding magic and exploring ancient ruins, at least in current D&D. Discovery is another aesthetic many enjoy in Dungeons & Dragons, uncovering a hidden tomb, encountering a never-before-seen creature, or learning lore about the game world that gives exploration thrill. Fellowship is practically guaranteed if you have a good group. The shared journey from level 1 nobodies to high-level champions creates a strong bond and many laughable memories, like the time the Sorcerer's Wild Magic turned everyone blue for an hour. Expression can also be present. Players often put a lot of themselves into their characters or enjoy customizing their playstyle. Maybe you're the kind of player who always plays the charming bard and flirts with NPCs, expressing that creative persona. Narrative and sensation might be less emphasized by the system itself, but a good dungeon master can certainly incorporate story and sensory immersion, describing the sights and sounds using music or other visuals. Overall, Dungeons & Dragons' default aesthetic promise is high adventure, excitement, danger, and heroic triumph in a richly imagined world. The MDA chain is clear. Its mechanics, crunchy combat rules, advancement system, produce dynamics, strategic combat, risk-reward decision-making, steady character growth, which produce aesthetics, a feeling of heroic challenge, accomplishment, and immersion in a fantasy saga. Fate Core is built on very different fundamentals than Dungeons & Dragons. Its primary mechanics revolve around aspects, short descriptive phrases for anything important in the game. Characters, scenes, objects, all can have aspects like On Fire, or Veteran Swordsman, or Wicked Temple of Doom. Fate uses fate points as a currency that players and game masters spend to invoke those aspects for bonuses or narrative effects. The dice system is 4DF, 4 fudge dice yielding results from less than 4 to plus 4 typically, which makes outcomes tend toward average with occasional swings. There are only a few skills or approaches, usually rated from plus 0 to plus 4 or so, and a simple stress track instead of hit points. Mechanics like create and advantage allow players to add new aspects to the scene. For example, knocked over a barrel of oil as an aspect that could make an area slippery or flammable. Combat in Fate is handled abstractly. It's not on a grid, it's more about narrative positioning and creating advantages like cornered on the enemy. Overall, Fate's mechanics are minimalist in number crunching, but maximalist in flexibility. They intentionally leave a lot open-ended, governed by a principle. If it makes sense in the story and you spend a Fate point, you can do it, or at least try. Fate's gameplay dynamics are highly collaborative and narrative-driven. One major dynamic is player authorship. Players have the power to introduce facts or twists into the story by creating or evoking aspects. This leads to a table dynamic where players are not just asking, "Can I do this?" but also proposing, "What if this is true in the story?" For example, a player might say, "I want to search the tavern for something I can use. Is there a loose floorboard?" I'll spend a fate point to declare there is one, an aspect like hidden cash under the floorboards. The GM in Fate is encouraged to say yes within reason and incorporate the player's idea. So the dynamic is one of co-authorship, which is quite different from a traditional game master authority dynamic in games like D&D. Another dynamic is driven by the compel mechanic. Since players get rewarded for accepting complications, you see a fun dynamic where players actually propose bad things for their characters because it's interesting. My aspect is trust everyone. I think it would be fair if I completely fall for this villain's lie here. Compel that and give me a fate point. This creates a dynamic of dramatic irony and character-driven twists, often leading to memorable story moments that everyone enjoys because the players are actively leaning into their flaws. Conflict in Fate tends to be dynamic in a descriptive way. Instead of worrying about exact positioning, players focus on tactics like, "I'll spend my turn to trip the enemy," giving them the aspect prone. That creates a supportive dynamic where setting up aspects for allies to exploit is key, similar to teamwork but more narratively described than in D&D. The pacing dynamic in Fate is usually brisk. Without needing to calculate lots of modifiers or look up tables, scenes resolve quickly and the story can jump forward smoothly. There's also a metagame dynamic, players discussing which aspects to invoke or whether to accept a compel. This means players often step in and out of character during play to talk about the story as a story. In some groups, this is very engaging. Everyone feels like a writer's room crafting a tale, but groups used to more immersion might find it distracts a bit. The experience Fate aims to deliver centers on narrative, expression, and fellowship with a good dose of fantasy, or whatever genre the game is set in. Narrative is front and center. Fate is all about creating a satisfying story without being hampered by rigid rules. If you play Fate, ideally you walk away feeling like you just told a great tale together, full of twists that you had a hand in making. Expression is also a big aesthetic draw. Players can really express their character concepts through aspects. You can play exactly the character you imagine because you literally write their defining traits as aspects and then bring them into play constantly. If you want to be the charming swashbuckler with a witty one-liner for every situation, you make dashing wit an aspect and invoke it whenever you banter. The game mechanics encourage you to ham it up in character. This is very satisfying for players who love role-playing, emphasizing the RP in RPG, and not just role-playing as in dice rolling. Fellowship comes from the collaborative nature of Fate. Since everyone is contributing ideas, it often feels like a very team-oriented experience. There's less adversarial tension with the game master. It's more, we're all on the same page making something cool that can strengthen the social fun and trust at the table. Challenge is present in Fate, but it's not as crunchy. The challenge is more about the narrative stakes than rules mastery. Some players might miss the hard tactical challenge of a game like D&D, but Fate trades that for the thrill of creativity, which is a different kind of challenge. When Fate is firing on all cylinders, the aesthetic is that of a shared storytelling adventure where you feel clever for how you influence the plot and emotionally invested in the characters' journeys. It's the fun of improvisational theater combined with a game. Powered by the Apocalypse games are more a family of games than one specific game, but they share common mechanics as mentioned. Key mechanics, playbooks, character archetypes with their own unique moves, the 2d6 plus stat resolution with tiered outcomes, and the idea of moves for the Game Master as well. Principles and agenda that guide what the Game Master says, ensuring they only do things when the rules say, like when a player misses a roll. There's usually a list of present moves, both basic moves anyone can do, and special moves for each playbook. Another crucial mechanic is that failures and partial successes inherently advance the story. In Dungeon World, a 7 to 9 on Defy Danger means you do the thing but with a complication. Mechanics also include systems like harm clocks or countdowns. Apocalypse World has countdown clocks for threats, and often a simple experience system where failing forward grants XP or certain moves do. Dungeon World, mark XP when you fail a roll, which actively encourages players to take risks. Powered by the Apocalypse games also rely on principles rather than explicit mechanics for some things. For example, be a fan of the player's characters is a rule for the GM, as is describe everything with evocative detail. These aren't mechanics in the numeric sense, but they are part of the system that shapes play. They ensure the game has a certain tone and fairness. So one could say Powered by the Apocalypse mechanics are a mix of lightweight rules and enforced narrative discipline through agendas and principles. The dynamics of a Powered by the Apocalypse game are all about flowing narrative and player-driven action, because everything in the rules is triggered by the fiction. To do it, do it. The dynamic is that players narrate freely and the rules follow their narration. This encourages players to be proactive. If you sit quietly and don't say what your character does, nothing happens. The Game Master isn't going to call for initiative or something out of the blue, unless a move like the Game Master's hard move happens. So players tend to drive the scene. I leap over the bar and swing my pistol towards the gangster. I want to intimidate him by shouting to drop the gun. That triggers a move. Maybe threaten with violence or similar depending on the game. Then the die outcome immediately feeds back. On a hit, the gangster does what you want. On a partial, maybe he does, but a complication, like his friends getting riled up, occurs. On a miss, maybe your gun jams, and now he's emboldened. The dynamic result is a constantly evolving story. There's never a moment where you as a player say, I attack, I miss. Okay, nothing happens. Instead, something always happens. This leads to a high engagement dynamic. Everyone is paying attention because the story can take a turn at any roll. Another dynamic is shared narrative control in a subtle way. When a player hits a 10 plus and gets to choose extra effects, common in many moves, they are deciding how the scene evolves. On a read a person move in Apocalypse World on a 10 plus, the player can ask the Game Master several questions that the Game Master must answer truthfully about an NPC. Effectively, the player digs into the narrative info directly. Powered by the Apocalypse games often have a rhythmic dynamic, intense action leading to softer moments and back again. This is partly because of how Game Master moves work. After something big, the Game Master might show signs of an approaching threat or tell the consequences and ask, which might slow the pace briefly. Then a player triggers another dramatic move and boom, action again. The structure of moves also means each session feels like a coherent episode of a TV show because the rules guide the fiction. You almost naturally get setups, climaxes, and cliffhangers. Another dynamic aspect, character spotlight and relationships. Playbooks and Powered by the Apocalypse are designed to shine in different areas. The hard holder in Apocalypse World deals with holding territory and followers. The gunlugger is the combat monster. This ensures each character gets moments where their moves make them the star, which creates a dynamic of trading the spotlight and also of interplay. The angel heals, the battle babe seduces, etc., each contributing differently. The mechanics of HX, history, HX, or strings in Monster Hearts creates dynamics of inter-character drama, encouraging players to invoke their past connections or tempt each other. So overall, the Powered by the Apocalypse dynamic is fast-paced, story-first, character-centric, and unpredictable, but usually in a good way. Powered by the Apocalypse games are usually designed to emulate specific genres or stories. Apocalypse World is gritty post-apocalyptic drama. Dungeon World is fantasy adventure. Monster Hearts is teen supernatural melodrama. So the aesthetics can vary by game. But generally, Powered by the Apocalypse delivers strongly on narrative and expression, and usually discovery and fantasy in terms of genre immersion. The emotional experience often highlighted is fiction-forward excitement. Players often report that playing a Powered by the Apocalypse campaign felt like watching or acting in a great TV series or movie of that genre. You get a satisfying story with twists and turns that feels organic. Because of the fail-forward design, even bad rolls lead to cool story moments, which means as a player, you feel a constant narrative engagement. There are fewer dull spots. For expression, Powered by the Apocalypse characters often have dramatic personalities and personal agendas. The games encourage that. The Monster Heart skins are all about exploring a certain dramatic archetype, like the insecure teen monster. This allows players to really express those themes. A player might explore what it means to be a lone wolf with a dark past in Dungeon World by taking moves that highlight fighting alone or a special bond with a weapon. If you want to play a trope, this allows you to lean in hard and really feel it. For challenge, the challenge in Powered by the Apocalypse is usually not about beating the system, since the system isn't adversarial and there's no balanced encounters in a strict sense, but more about making tough narrative choices. For instance, in Apocalypse World, you might have to decide which faction of survivors to support. A moral dilemma, which is a narrative challenge. The tension when dice are rolled is real. Characters can die or things can go badly wrong. So there is definitely excitement and suspense, a kind of challenge aesthetic. But it's framed as drama rather than a tactical puzzle. For Fellowship, these games focus on relationships. Some even have influence mechanics like Masks, a new generation, where team influence matters. So players often feel a bond and group identity. But because Powered by the Apocalypse often tackles interpersonal drama, sometimes that fellowship is tested, which can be part of the fun also. Think of a drama show where the team argues but ultimately comes together. The aesthetic aim of most of these games can be summarized as, let's collaboratively experience a story in X genre that feels as thrilling as the best fiction in that genre. When done right, players feel immersed in the genre, fantasy, horror, noir, etc., which corresponds to the fantasy aesthetic of make-believe, and invested in their narrative and their character's fate, narrative and expression. In short, a very story-rich fun. Knowing about mechanics, dynamics, and aesthetics isn't just an abstract theory. It has practical uses for role-playing game designers, game masters, and even players. Here are some ways the MDA framework can help in practice. Designing or homebrewing RPGs. If you're designing your own game or tweaking an existing one, homebrew rules or custom classes, MDA provides a roadmap. Start by thinking about the aesthetic. What experience do you want players to have? Do you want your new homebrew campaign to be scarier, more lighthearted, more strategic? Once you have a goal, say I want more horror and more tension, consider what dynamics would lead to that. Tension might come from players feeling vulnerable, so dynamics like scarcity of resources, unknown threats, and time pressure might create that feeling. Now choose or tweak mechanics to produce those dynamics. For example, implement a sanity meter, make healing harder to come by, and add a time-based mechanic. Like, it could be something like every 10 real minutes something creepy happens. In short, design from the aesthetic backwards, ADM. This ensures your mechanics serve a purpose. Many RPG designers do this implicitly. The creators of Blades in the Dark, for instance, clearly wanted a game that felt like daring heists aesthetic. So they crafted mechanics like flashbacks and stress to ensure the dynamic play matched that vibe. As a homebrewer, you can do the same on a smaller scale. Want your D&D combats to feel more cinematic? Perhaps introduce a mechanic where players can spend inspiration for dramatic stunts, a mechanic tweak to create a dynamic of more bold, narrative-described actions yielding an aesthetic of high-action excitement. campaign tuning. Even without changing rules, a game master can use MDA to adjust how a campaign runs. After a few sessions, reflect on the aesthetics. Are the players having the kind of fun everyone hoped for? Maybe you intended the game to be a serious political drama, but everyone is being a goof and nothing feels dramatic. That's an aesthetic mismatch. Using MDA, analyze the dynamics at play. Perhaps the mechanics, maybe a silly random table, or very easy encounters are encouraging a lot of jokes and not presenting challenge. So the dynamic is goofy, free-form play, resulting in a comedic aesthetic. To tune it, you don't necessarily overhaul the system, but you can adjust how you run it. Introduce more challenging scenarios, or enforce a slightly different tone by, say, using background music or requesting players stay in character more. In effect, you're trying to alter dynamics, player behavior, to shift the aesthetics. Alternatively, if the group is loving one aspect of the game, say they are really into the fellowship aesthetic, having a great time role-playing campfire scenes and bonding, you might dial back on rushing the main plot and indulge those moments more, since that aesthetic is delivering fun. Tuning a campaign often means tweaking either the content, the scenario design, or emphasizing or de-emphasizing certain rules. Use MDA as a guide. If players want more narrative and expression, maybe loosen the mechanical constraints and give them more narrative control. More lenient rules for trying creative actions, for example. If they want more challenge, maybe tighten up and use those optional gritty rules or throw trickier puzzles at them. Critiquing and understanding game systems. MDA is an excellent tool for critical analysis. Suppose you try a new role-playing game system and something feels off. You're not enjoying it as expected, but breaking it down, you might pinpoint the issue. For example, this game claims to be super narrative, but we found the story faltered. An MDA analysis might show that the mechanics, perhaps a rigid turn structure or too many charts to consult, created dynamics that broke the narrative flow. Maybe players kept pausing to look up rules, disrupting immersion, thus failing the intended narrative aesthetic. That's something you could feed back to the designers or fix with house rules. Or consider a common critique. D&D doesn't do horror well. Why might that be? MDA-wise, D&D's mechanics, lots of player power, hit points, reliable healing, etc., create dynamics of feeling heroic and in control, which yield aesthetics of empowerment and adventure, not helpless fear. To do horror, you'd need mechanics that make players feel more helpless, like Call of Cthulhu's slim chances to succeed and fragile health and sanity. Thus, one might conclude D&D's baseline isn't suited for horror aesthetic without heavy modification, which is useful knowledge when choosing a system. On the flip side, if a game excels at a certain kind of fun, MDA might be able to explain why. Many people love the Fate system for the creative freedom it gives. MDA shows that Fate's mechanics, aspects, and fate points produce dynamics, player-driven story twists, collaborative world building that hit the expression and narrative aesthetic very well. In discussion circles, you might hear people basically using MDA terms. That game has great mechanics for teamwork, which makes it feel really cooperative. That's identifying a mechanic dynamic link. An understanding of MDA even helps in comparisons. Why might one person prefer game X over game Y? Perhaps game X offers fellowship and challenge, whereas game Y offers narrative and expression. Different strokes for different folks. MDA helps articulate those differences beyond, I like it, it's fun. Player perspective in session 0. Players can benefit from understanding MDA also, especially when communicating with the GM and each other about what they want. During a session 0, the pre-game discussion of expectations, the group could discuss the desired aesthetics. Do we want a serious game or a funny one? High challenge or more storytelling? If everyone agrees on an aesthetic, then they can consider what system or style of play supports it. If a player really craves a certain kind of fun, say one player really loves tactical combat, so challenge, and the rest want a dramatic narrative game, at least that's out in the open. The group might decide to include an occasional tactical minigame to satisfy that player, or the player might adjust expectations. It's all about having a language to discuss the experience of play. Many misaligned campaigns suffer from not clarifying expectations. MDA gives a framework for that conversation. Our mechanics and style should reinforce the kind of fun that we want. Additionally, players who know what dynamics help their fun can self-regulate a bit. If everyone agrees on a horror vibe, players might refrain from goofy dynamics like cracking jokes at every scary moment, because they know it undermines the aesthetic. In a way, the whole group can act as co-designers of the experience, aligning their playstyle dynamics with the desired aesthetics and maybe even suggesting rule tweaks, mechanics to help. In essence, the MDA framework is a tool for intentionality. Rather than hoping a game turns out fun, designers and game masters can intentionally shape the mechanics and dynamics toward a goal. And rather than vaguely saying, I liked it or I didn't like it, players can pinpoint what they liked, the camaraderie, the tension, the story, and trace it to what happened in the game. Many in the RPG design community find MDA valuable for this reason. It offers clarity. It's not the only framework out there, there are others, but MDA is widely used because it's simple and flexible. As one commenter noted, it's a useful framework for both RPG designers and GMs, and most good games use its principles, whether knowingly or not. So whether you're designing a gritty survival campaign, crafting the perfect heist mechanic, or just trying to figure out why your group loves one system more than another, the MDA framework gives you a powerful lens to see what's really happening at the table. It's not the only tool, but it's one every GM and designer should have in their kit. If you found this video useful from this deep dive, be sure to like, subscribe, and drop your thoughts in the comments section below. I love to hear from you. And as always, thanks for watching. See you next time.